singing. And I also, following high school, I went to Cornell University, where I got a bachelor's in history, focusing in economics, and developed even more my love for music. I sang in an all-male a cappella group there. After college, I worked at two organizations. First was Teach for America during the beginning of the pandemic, where I was an AP World History teacher in the Newark, New Jersey school district, teaching about 106 high schoolers. And after that, I worked at a technology firm called Qualtrics, working as a tech consultant prior to doing what I do now, which is working as the co-founder of Mission to Ukraine with my best friend, Mark Kreynovich. So Mark was born in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and his parents immigrated to the US to Baltimore, Maryland when Mark was about 6 months old. And every summer growing up between the ages of 5 and 18, Mark would spend the entirety of his summer in Ukraine, spending time with his family, brushing up on his Russian and Ukrainian language skills, and getting an understanding of making both the United States and Ukraine his home. We met at Cornell University as roommates our first year of college, and quickly became best friends over our love for history, international relations, language, culture, and so many more things. And yes, as was mentioned earlier, crazy enough, we share a birthday that we would never anticipate would become a call to action to go and do this work in Ukraine. Mark, following Cornell, worked at Goldman Sachs in investment banking, and after that at a startup called Quip, which is an oral health care startup in Brooklyn. So to give you all just the briefest overview and the quickest way in which to understand what Mission to Ukraine is, it's best to just look at this slide and to read it directly. We are a direct on-the-ground aid organization, and we focus on procuring and delivering critical supplies and getting them to the places that need them most throughout Ukraine. The places that need supplies the most change over time. It's a rather dynamic and fluid state of affairs, having to operate in a war zone, but we focus on being able to convert the dollars that we crowdfund into tangible help and need that we can show our supporters and give to the people that need it the most. So I structured this discussion in three parts. The first is to give you all an overview of how we even started this back on March 3rd of this year, what we've accomplished to date, and following that is our upcoming projects that we are focusing on, as well as some lessons learned along the way. So if we flash back to February 24th of 2022, the day before Mark and my shared birthday, the 25th, the war in Ukraine began. And immediately Mark and his family group chat starts to pick up the pace, and people are texting one another, asking how people are, what's happening, what's going on, how is Kharkiv, Mark's hometown, how's Mark's grandpa? It was chaos. There were a lot of news reports saying a war has begun, an invasion has begun. It was confusing and scary, and it was a lot of emotion going around. I wasn't with Mark at the time. Mark was in New York, and I was helping my uncle at an event. And I knew that Mark was probably going through hell in his own mind and with his family. So I instantly called him, and we met up and celebrated our birthday together the next day, which was not much of a celebration and more of pondering what to do and how helpless we felt just being over in the US, not knowing how our friends were and how Mark's family was doing. And so we started to have a serious conversation back in New York City in Mark's apartment. And during a conversation that we had in his living room at around 11 in the morning, I don't know why I said it, but I said, why don't we go there? And Mark said, go where? And I said, Eastern Europe, and let's try to help. And we both looked at each other and chuckled and thought it was a ridiculous notion. We weren't going to go and fly towards a war zone and, have to tell our parents. How do you tell your parents that you're going to go and do that? But after about an hour of serious conversation and thinking about it, and knowing that Mark already had family and friends that were submitting requests for humanitarian aid, we decided that we would go for a week. And after an hour of talking, we bought tickets for that same night to depart from JFK Airport, flying to Vienna, Austria. And I quickly went home to Ridgewood, packed a bag, told my parents over another hour-long conversation that I was going to Eastern Europe, and I headed back to JFK with Mark, where we launched our crowdfunding page to try and raise funds to help the people that we were going over there to help. We had the intention of leaving for a week and a goal of $5,000. And since that point, it has grown and grown and grown out of using our gut and because of people and the support of people like you. And in leaving New York, these are two quotes from, I think it's also from that Cornell article that was mentioned at the introduction of my conversation. And these are just some of our thoughts that we had when we were leaving New York City and going on an endeavor that we didn't realize would take up the next 9 months of our life. We both felt very strongly that our values and the things that we stood for and believed in were being violated. And we also wanted to feel as though we were helping directly the people that we knew and love in Ukraine itself. And we knew in our hearts that it was the right thing to do to go. And we also knew that it was the right thing to stay. So when we got to Eastern Europe, our first course of action was fulfilling the small one-off requests that we were getting from Mark's family and friends that we knew were still in Ukraine or had connections to places like mobile hospitals or clinics or places that didn't have electricity and needed communications equipment. We just tried to fulfill those orders. We were only trying, our only goal was to raise $5,000, but within the first day of being there, we had raised 10. And after 3 days, we had raised 20. And after 7 days, we had raised 40. So we've suddenly started to realize that we could start to fulfill needs more and more quickly and help in a larger range of ways. And we started in Vienna because one of my dear friends from Ridgewood, actually, and Cornell, Anya Sherman, was living and studying there, and she let us crash on her couch for a night before we could get a car ourselves to go and drive around Eastern Europe. And so we stayed at her home and went around Vienna the first day, looking for medical supplies to supply 2 hospitals in Ukraine, one in a city called Cherkasy, and the second in another Ukrainian city that was hard hit early in the war. So we walked around Vienna for an entire day, visiting pharmacy after pharmacy, asking if we could possibly get, wholesale or discounted prices on the medications and the orders that we had gotten throughout Ukraine. And what was unique was that the orders that we were getting were directly from the hospitals themselves. So they were itemized, listed with quantities and expected, dosages that were needed for these medications. So we were able to present a lot of these pharmacies with the exact things that we needed in a very clear way. But we were turned away probably about a dozen times. And after the 12th or 13th pharmacy, we finally arrived at one that was willing to fulfill the order that we had after the next 2 to 3 days. And we were overjoyed. We were going to stay in Vienna, but in watching the news in those early parts of the war, we realized that most of the help that was needed for refugees was located in Poland, where millions of Ukrainians were flowing into the country since February 24th. And so we got a rental car and we decided to head up to Krakow, Poland, which is about a 5-hour drive north of Vienna. On the way, after we came back from Krakow, we were able to get that medical order back, actually. And we were able to put it into this van and deliver it to some drivers that we made connections with in Slovakia who were doing end-to-end delivery. So they were taking our supplies, putting it into their truck, and they weren't opening it until it arrived at its end destination. There were unfortunately issues of profiteering and people siphoning off materials along the way. And so we made a point to make sure that the drivers we worked with were only going to be opening and delivering our boxes at its end destination. And these are some pictures of both the pharmacists that we worked with in helping us fulfill the order, as well as some of the medications as they were boxed up and then loaded into a van that we rented. And so when we got to Krakow, we got confirmation that the doctors had actually received their medical supplies, which is pictured here on the left-hand side of the screen, which we were overjoyed for. It proved to us that we were able to be able to find and procure and deliver the supplies that were desperately needed. And we met countless number of people in that first week along the way that we were able to help. This picture here of the woman holding the cat named Box was taken in Krakow the night of our first full day in the city. We had met her and her cat and her 8 other family members at the Krakow train station, where we learned they had nowhere to stay and they were desperate to find somewhere to find some stability in these early couple of weeks of the war. And so from the money that we were able to fundraise, we were able to pay for a month's worth of rent and groceries, enabling her and her 8 other family members to stay in Krakow and try to build some semblance of normalcy in their lives. They were all only carrying either a backpack or a carry-on suitcase, and all of them were either children, women, or elderly. This picture here, where you see these 2 folks hugging with a pink folder in front of the American flag, was taken outside of the American embassy in Krakow, where these 2 women are embracing after hearing that their applications for visas were approved. We had gone there to help with some family members that Mark knew and family friends that needed assistance with translation efforts. And given Mark's Russian and Ukrainian language skills, he was able to directly help with that. We also were able to go directly to the border itself between Poland and Ukraine. And when we went on the 6th of March, there were roughly 8,000 to 10,000 people crossing per day. And it was an incredible feat to see all those people crossing by foot, but also even more incredible were all the volunteers that were there and that had set up tents and food stations and clothing donations and SIM card sales and places in which people crossing the border were suddenly met, having had to leave everything, with many supplies and resources that were directly there to help them. We met these folks that you see here standing at the back of this 18-wheeler, which we helped load up until 3 a.m, with supplies being driven directly into Ukraine. Them and so many others inspired us by telling us the stories of how they arrived at the border on the eve of the 24th of February, anticipating what was going to come and being there throughout snow and rain and sleet and helping for hours and hours on end, days on end. And it was incredibly inspiring to get to meet them. This is a video. The video I'm about to play is a video at the Krakow train station, which I had mentioned earlier, where we met that woman and her cat and her 8 family members. And there are about 1,000 people here in this train station that are all Ukrainian refugees figuring out their next destinations. And this moment really made an impact on myself as I was the one filming this. And I decided to walk down and to just see what it was like and what these people were experiencing. So I'll play that now.
Przyjechaliśmy na 4. krajnik, najlepszą pomoc wsparcie,
Надо было сразу дать.
210 20 знайомих.
So as you could tell from that video, there were so many people that it's hard to even count all those that were there. It made a direct impact on me. I was just so stunned by the quantity, but I was also comforted in seeing the resilience and the resolve of the parents that were there with their kids, in that people weren't sad and crying and upset despite everything that was happening. There was still love and joyousness and kids fooling around and parents trying to corral them back to their side despite having to go through this terrible event. And it was through getting to actually walk into that crowd that we were able to meet that family that we were able to help. And so a lot of these early efforts that I'm discussing in these first week or two of the war itself, they were very much kind of hit and go. It was 18 to 20-hour days of being awake and trying to help and finding a new way of providing a service and to find ways in which we could make the most impact. It was things like this video I'm about to play, where we went to an electronics store and we decided to just take every single rechargeable battery we could off of the shelf, because we were told rechargeable batteries were in short supply. And it was also about the smaller moments, the moments in which you weren't necessarily picking up a box and loading it into a truck, but rather comforting a child or a mom or anyone that had to go through these terrible experiences within the last week. This is a video of me playing with this little girl, Maya, who's just 4 years old. And she and her family are living in a reconverted university in Slovakia that have been set up for Ukrainian refugee housing.
She said, "Put it on your eye now." Put it right on your eye.
Yeah, right on my eye. So we had visited Maya and her family on International Women's Day, which is a very celebrated holiday in Eastern Europe. And we were able to bring them all gifts and flowers and to make them feel special, despite their home having been directly hit by a rocket attack. So after 2 weeks of doing this early work, in which we saw the continual support of people from home in Ridgewood and family members giving us donations, we had done a lot. We had been to 11 countries. We'd driven over 4,000 miles. It was a very hectic and fulfilling and exhilarating time to be trying to help and make an impact. And after our first 2 weeks of doing this work, we needed to take some time to think about what was next. Were we going to continue doing this? Were we going to spend all this money all at once and just, buy all the aid and come back to our lives in New York, pursuing, the corporate careers that we had already kind of set our paths on for 2 years? But what we really reflected on was this sense of responsibility that we had felt. We had been able to get all of these supplies into Ukraine. We had made dozens of connections with people in logistics and shipping, in the medical industry, in housing equipment, in drivers, and know-how in different humanitarian organizations. And we had all this knowledge and experience and have been able to successfully do something that, when you finally hear that you've made an impact, it's hard to walk away from knowing that you could probably continue to make that same impact. And these are just some photos of the materials we got just in those first 2 weeks, and some of the people that helped us and that we were able to help, like the physicians there or the drivers that we partnered with above them. It was an incredible feeling after 2 weeks to see this. And so we started to focus in on what we wanted to do beyond, once we had raised $100,000, and we wanted to see if we could continue doing this work ourselves, to continue raising money and to continue providing as much help as we could. And so we focused in on 3 different objectives that we had as an organization, not just a 1-week crowdfunding page to raise $5,000, but an actual organization that was focused on continuing to help in the Ukraine crisis. And so we focused in on these 3 things. First, we wanted to emphasize that we were a direct boots on the ground organization that was trying to get materials into the hands of people that didn't have connections to places like the International Red Cross or Habitat for Humanity or a plethora of UNICEF or a plethora of other international organizations. We wanted to get materials into the hands of people that were making a direct impact on the lives of dozens or hundreds of people. Secondly, we wanted to give a platform to refugees to share their stories and to emphasize in their own language, Russian or Ukrainian, their lived experiences, since we hadn't been seeing that as much on the Western media news channels during our time over there. And then lastly, we wanted to focus on providing more than just direct and immediate aid, because the war changed over time from when people needed, food to be delivered to them directly to until about May, it started to become more of an emphasis and focus on longer term projects, from servicing immediate needs to servicing larger projects that would make a prolonged impact well into the future for hundreds of lives. And so since that point of coming up with these three core focuses and objectives, we've done a lot. And these are between the months of May and December of this year. It's been extraordinarily busy. Our main focus since we've been in Ukraine has been on medicines and medical devices. We've been able to purchase over $200,000 worth, including prescription medications, bandages, tourniquets, other surgical supplies. We've been able to get tactical first aid kits that are used by medics in places like Odessa or Kherson or Mariupol. We've been able to also purchase protective gear for doctors, such as bulletproof vests and helmets. And these are going to medics that are going directly into the front lines under live fire and providing medical assistance to people that have been injured or find themselves, unfortunately, caught in those situations. We also, early on in the war, provided radio and communication equipment to volunteers on the ground, since a lot of cellular towers and networks were damaged and continue to be damaged throughout this conflict. So these radios enabled them to coordinate in either evacuation efforts or delivery of food or medications to elderly folk who aren't able to necessarily leave their apartment buildings, and many others. We also have provided food. We helped in Kharkiv in providing and delivering about 11,000 hot meals per day for about a month, partnering with an organization there. Our Kharkiv partner continues to do these operations, and they feed about 2,000 people a day, and they've been doing it since March 15th. So it's been an incredible 8.5-month endeavor for them, and it's a partnership that we really cherish and continue to try and grow. We've also purchased some minibuses and cars for evacuations. Our Kharkiv partners evacuate over 5,000 people, and the cars that we've been able to purchase, which have been used primarily in the cities of Mariupol and Kherson, have evacuated over 1,000 people to date. So getting them out of the most hard-hit conflict areas that are being hit with missiles and artillery shells, and getting them to places of relative safety so that they can determine the next steps for themselves and their families. We've also done things like purchase ambulances. So this is an ambulance that we purchased with the help of another organization, Ukrainian humanitarian organization based in Luxembourg. The woman holding the sign her name is Ksenia, and she was our driver that helped us drive the ambulance all the way from Luxembourg to Ukraine, which is it's about 22 hours for anyone that's curious or wanting to make that trip. And I have something here. This is on our Instagram page. We shared the story of the ambulance when we purchased it. And we didn't deliver it empty. We actually filled up the entire thing full of medical supplies and food and different types of needs that both medical personnel and civilians needed based on where the ambulance was going. It was a wonderful thing to be a part of, and we were so happy to get the ambulance delivered to where it needed to go. And also, speaking on one of our core objectives as an organization, we also focus on sharing the personal stories and the stories about the people that we were helping or working with. This is a man here. His name is Sasha. Sasha is an incredible man. We met Sasha on the border of Ukraine and Poland in the most active border crossing between the two countries. Sasha is from Mariupol, which is a city that I'm sure many of you have heard of in the early parts of the war. It's been more or less devastated entirely by the Russians in the early parts of the war. And Sasha at the time was not in Ukraine when the war started because he was looking for work in the EU to provide his family with better standard of living. And so when the war started, he couldn't go back in without risking getting conscripted, and figured that he could provide more help to the people that were crossing the border than he could in trying to get all the way back and to get to his family. And so working day and night, Sasha would go to the border, carry people's luggage a kilometer to the bus station, load people onto a bus, get them to where they needed to go, and would go back. And he would do that about 18 to 20 hours a day. And he did it for about 6 weeks. He was without his wife or his mother or two of his children. And yet all he did day in and day out was keep hope, keep happy, and focus on helping others. Extraordinarily selfless man who luckily has been reunited with his family and is now living safely in Germany after working on the border for over 2.5 months, having lost so much and not being able to return home to Mariupol for some time. This is another story that I wanted to share, and I think I have the time to do it. These are some pictures from some of the food deliveries and evacuations that Mission to Ukraine has been a part of. We donated and distributed food in Mariupol to hundreds of civilians that were looking for supplies. There were so many thanks that we needed to make to the drivers who were making this perilous journey into Mariupol. They needed to pass through over 18 Russian checkpoints and take some back roads and have to go around a lot of different obstacles to get actually into Mariupol to provide and deliver these supplies. And so we were so grateful to get to work with them and to see that the vehicles we had purchased because of the support of all of our donors was able to make a direct impact on the lives of so many. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about some of our upcoming projects for Mission to Ukraine. And one of them has already been completed, and that is the mobile hospital clinic. And the second one focuses on what are called winterization efforts. And these are essentially projects that focus on helping during the winter. So things like providing energy, light, heat, so on and so forth to people that are suffering in some of the harder hit areas of Ukraine since this war began. So the first winterization project that we're focusing on, we call Project Windows. Throughout the war, because of blast ordnance from missiles or rocket fire or artillery, a lot of windows have been damaged structurally and both the glass itself. So the glass is either broken or the frame has been knocked out of place. And this is affecting millions of people, not 10, 20, 30,000. It's affecting millions. And so it's a huge endeavor. But luckily for us, we've made some connections with Habitat for Humanity, and speaking with them, learned about the essential parts that are needed to make some of these repairs. And we've started to focus in on a couple of apartment buildings in Kharkiv, Mark's hometown in the far east of Ukraine, and are focusing directly on replacing some of these windows and providing better insulation for the residents of Kharkiv. So if you can see here in these images, a lot of the homes in Kharkiv right now look more or less like this. Their windows are boarded with plywood, which worked relatively well during the summer in keeping out, pests and critters and some of the heat. But in the wintertime, it doesn't work very well in terms of a means of insulation. And it also blocks essential light, daylight, from entering into your home, which can just make a really dark and terrible time feel even worse. So we were able to tour some of these apartment complexes and see what it was like inside, and starting to see some of the early efforts in providing some more insulation to many of these homes all over Kharkiv. This is an example of an entire apartment complex, which we are looking to replace all the windows for, and provide additional layers of insulation. And so here there are about 500 people living in this one apartment complex alone. The other project that we have completed, but is tied to what we always will continue to do, which is to focus on the medical supplies and the medical industry in Ukraine, is we were able to purchase, to procure and deliver a state-of-the-art mobile hospital clinic to Ukraine that is being brought to the front lines to help civilian and military personnel who are injured. And it'll be operated both by civilian medical personnel as well as the military, in keeping it safe. It comes equipped with an examination room, a reception, laboratory, x-ray room, operating room, and even a place to take showers and to sleep for medical personnel that use it. And we were able to get the mobile clinic delivered on Thanksgiving Day of all days. And we were so happy and proud that this was happening, especially as winter was really starting to set in with the first major snowfall, which you can see in the image behind Mark and myself. This is a video that I'm playing now from a TV interview that Mark was doing with a local Ukrainian news channel when we first delivered the mobile hospital. The mobile hospital will be able to service roughly 150 to 200 people per day. It expands, as you can see here on the side, to like growing the size of the rooms and making it possible. You see our logo there on the side. And this was in Kiev on December 2nd or 3rd, so not too long ago did we get this in, and only a couple of days ago did we get confirmation that the mobile hospital is currently on the front lines and it is already providing help to dozens of citizens that need its aid desperately. So here's a full picture of the mobile medical unit to give you a perspective of how big it is. It comes with a generator, keeps itself powered. It's a little bit wider and a little bit longer than your traditional tractor trailer. So it was a literal and figurative big deal that we were really, really proud to get to be a part of. So now towards the end of the talk, just wanted to share some more just personal aspects that people typically ask me and Mark about, which is like living in Ukraine. There are always things like supply shortages in both food and electricity. We live in Kiev. We both moved there in July of this year and have been running Mission to Ukraine primarily from our laptops wherever we are, but mainly out of Kiev, Ukraine, which we will be returning to in mid-January. And there's also lots of logistical complexity in living in Ukraine. There are checkpoints, there's martial hour at 11 p.m. where you're legally, no one is allowed to be out on the streets between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., which in a way is actually kind of a nice thing, having a bedtime set every day, but inherently makes it more difficult if you need to go and get somewhere late. And there are also obviously safety considerations, which are the things that most people ask us about, such as air raids and sheltering procedures and locations. And I always like to remind people that despite the terrible things that are going on in cities, some more directly than others, people continue to live and to thrive and to pursue their dreams in Ukraine. People are still going to cafes, meeting up with friends at restaurants, going on dates, walks in the park. And you might hear an air raid siren and you shelter in place, but it has not broken the spirit of the people whatsoever. And just a couple of lessons that we've learned along the way. I know I'm speaking much longer than I'd anticipated, so I appreciate all of your patience. Being purpose-driven is something that has been essential to Mark and my mission over the past 9 months. If we hadn't set these 3 objectives, it would have been difficult to kind of stay on a straight path and knowing what was best and where we needed to pivot and focus on. And so setting these objectives was really helpful, and they've changed a little bit over time, but in setting them, we were able to stay on a good path. Secondly, is just the power of people. Mark and I have benefited from the fact that when you put good into the world gives you good back. Always asking for help is something that has resonated true with throughout all different parts of our work. We wouldn't have been able to do any of this were it not for the people we've met, made partnerships with, collaborated with, spoken to, asked advice from, and most importantly, gotten donations from. We would, if we didn't ask people for their help to help people that we knew, we never would have been able to do any of this. And then lastly is this idea of the importance of service. There are a lot of opportunities for service I felt when I was growing up in Ridgewood, and I was able to embrace them. But starting in the adult world and, first 2 years of a career, I didn't necessarily feel as though service was made readily available to me. It needed to be something I sought out. And since being able to make service more or less the core focus of my life for the past 9 months, I've just found that there's an innate important benefit to focusing on helping others and trying to do more with what you've been given than you possibly can. And the responsibility that you have because of the privileges of the places you live and grow up and things you get to enjoy. So focusing on service and focusing on how you can give more and do more has been a really, really important lesson that I've taken from this work. So now that this is the end of my talk with all of you and conversation, I just wanted to put this information up. These are ways to give if you'd like to make a contribution to Mission to Ukraine and our work. There are 2 options, one of which enables you to donate immediately. Another offers you additional tax deductible donation ideas. If you have any questions, you can email me, and I'll keep this screen up during the Q&A section of this. But I just wanted to thank all of you for listening to me today and being interested in the work that I and Mark and countless number of supporters and partners throughout the world have been doing these past 9 months. And I hope that you will join us in following our story and contributing to our cause. And I hope you are all having a lovely holiday season. And thank you again so much.
Thank you, Dillon. My goodness. I just want to, before I ask you my question, I'm going to just allow everyone who's on this webinar to talk. So I'd love you to be able to ask Dillon a question directly if you'd like to. So you can raise your virtual hand or just make sure your mic is off if you are not talking. So I'm just doing that right now. I was first going to ask you, like, my gosh, like raising over $100,000, like how on earth did you make that happen? But as I watched your presentation and I just saw like just how clear it is and how accountable you are to, to those who are donating funds. Your mission is so clear, but more than anything, like just how you connected with we are beholden to one another, and like you said, kindness begets kindness. That is the core of everything, and why you can remain hopeful when all of these things are happening in Ukraine and beyond. So I just love that you and Mark immediately connected when you were students at Cornell, and you had that immediate connection. And I just thank you for answering that call, and instead of like just watching Mark's be devastated with his family, the 2 of you actually said, okay, what are we going to do? And you put all of those incredible business and beyond skills together, and the logistics involved are just remarkable. So I mean, I'll just start by asking you, like, how, like when you did start to literally pen to paper and figure out how you were going to put this all together, did you both have very complementary skills, like you have a shared mission and that personal connection, and did you just kind of sit down and really sort of assess like who's going to do what, and do you both have that ability obviously to network very quickly? It seems like you really work well together in getting this off the ground.
Yeah, the development of how things grew was at first chaotic and hectic. You have to remember, our intention originally was to go for a week. It was to go for a week and it was to raise $5,000. And then to come back, and I was looking for work, and Mark was going to keep working at his job. And so when a week turned into 2, that was already a big deal. And then when 2 weeks turned into a month, that was an even bigger deal. And so along the way, we figured out that, yes, we both had skills in different things, but ultimately what was required was leveraging the soft skills that both of us knew each of us had very strongly, which were, like you said, networking, telling a story, writing, coming across as professional, adapting to new situations, being open, asking for help, being completely and utterly humble with everything we were doing. All that our work was focused on was helping others. So we didn't feel like there were any of the barriers that perhaps, you can feel both in your life or in work, where you want to kind of do everything and go, or ask for other things, but you might feel some kind of hesitation or restriction. We didn't feel that. And I think that helped us a lot, especially in the early parts, because all it was in our mind was, if we do not get out of bed and work our hardest, someone that could have been helped isn't. And so, yeah, it changed and adapted, and we figured out the ways in which we could share those responsibilities. And it's still growing and adapting even today, as we've grown to what we are. And we continue to try and figure out, well, what's next for us, and how do we do another project, or raise more funds, or make a partnership with another organization.
Right. How is Mark's family in Kharkiv? How are they doing?
Mark's family is good. Luckily, all of his family members are now out of Ukraine. So that happened at the end of October, actually, when we came back. Mark and I came back to the United States for a week, because we brought home Mark's grandfather, who is now safely living in Baltimore, Maryland. And Mark is down there right now in Baltimore, visiting his family and seeing his grandfather. So they're doing well, and we're just so happy that he's home. It's one less worry that Mark doesn't have to have on his brain, and all of us don't have to have on our brains. So we're very happy.
What was your feeling from President Zelensky's visit to DC?
Oh, I thought it was monumentous. I think he did an excellent job of communicating not only the situation in Ukraine, but the needs of his people, and the deep sense of gratitude that I have felt being there on the ground, that every Ukrainian possesses. The sense of thanks and love for America and how they've been able to support Ukraine throughout the past 9 months is not lost on anyone. And I think it's important for Americans to hear that, because, in the age that we live in, things can get misconstrued. And this idea of asking for too much, or, that's, to me, whenever I hear anything like that, it's nonsense. And I think Zelensky made that point just very poignantly, in saying that the money and the supplies and the support that America gives is not charity, but the greatest investment possible for the future of America and democracy. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that having Ukraine and having Ukraine stand is fundamental to our position on the international stage, our own freedoms and our own liberties that we get to enjoy. During this holiday season, in which, I know that I'm going to have electricity in an hour. Like that, most of my friends for Christmas in Ukraine, they didn't have electricity, and they made eggs over a couple of candles in their stove. And so it's I think Zelensky coming, and then just as quickly as he came, going right back, is just testament to the strength and resolve of not only him, but his government, and most importantly, his people.
Well said. Okay, I'd like to open it up for anybody who has questions. Feel free to raise your hand, or you can just unmute and ask Dillon a question. I see that Mike asked about your Venmo ID, Dillon.
Oh yeah, I'll send that right now.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat.
You were talking about the joy. We have a lot of Ukrainian ESL students here at the library, especially in the last year, and it's been amazing. They, learn the language very quickly, and many of the students are working already, and there is an absolute joy and humility, and it's just been wonderful to get to know a lot of these people. Really,
Yeah, it's wonderful. Here, I'll put it. I'm actually in the chat. I'm gonna put links
oh, perfect.
to just a bunch of the different
Yes, that's great.
places in which people can go donate, learn about tax deductible options, as well as just our website.
Yes.
Let's see.
You have to put it in the Q&A because chat's disabled.
Got
But a
it.
chance to see. Oh, let me fix that.
Where are you now and how much you've raised? And where are you wanting to go?
So currently, as of date, we have raised a little over $550,000, which has been incredible, and we have spent about 500 of that $550,000. So we have a lot more ambitions and plans and things that we'd like to contribute towards. Primarily is focusing on these winterization efforts that I mentioned in my discussion, as well as continuing our medical support. So our aim is, it doesn't have a bound figure, but in the immediate next 2 months, we're looking to raise at least another $100,000 to $200,000 to fulfill some of the large requests that we have throughout some of these hard hit regions. And so since Giving Tuesday and Thanksgiving, we've been sharing more stories and trying to get the word out about our work and getting eyes on the things that we are doing. And so we encourage everyone that hears about our story, is inspired by what we do, to try and share what we're doing, and to emphasize just the level of need that is still present and continues to grow, unfortunately. So for all of you, if you could visit our website and our social media and be able to share that, as well as make a financial contribution, encourage your friends, your family, work colleagues, anyone in your own community to support this cause. If you also support it, we're very grateful for anyone that can do that for us.
It's amazing to see that van. Like it's massive and so practical, right? And to see your logo on there, I mean, that must be a thrill to just, to have been able to make that happen.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah.
I always go back to this because it's so true. At no point it's just still, it's hard to like set into our own brains, seeing that like we went from a 1 week cause to becoming this organization. And we're just so honored and humbled to be able to even continue doing it, because a lot of other organizations that we knew of, they more often than not fizzled out or lost funding, or weren't able to keep up with the demands that they were trying to service. And so a lot of them have had to unfortunately close shop and go home. But we've fortunately been able to continue, but that only is possible with continued support. So for those that have already donated, we always just ask them to share, and those that haven't, we ask them to do both. And so that's the lifeblood of a nonprofit, is those that continue to contribute to the efforts of the people running it.
Actually, this kind of connects nicely to one of Jan's questions. Have you found your calling, and can you see yourself going back to corporate life?
I think I've certainly found my calling in one respect, in that I think the entrepreneurial aspect of this is certainly tied to what I would say is a calling. Mark and I have really enjoyed and grown and learned a lot and have never felt so fulfilled in anything that we've done before. And in large part, that I think is because we've gotten to design and do everything ourselves. And that's something that both of us want to continue into the future. This aspect of our nonprofit work and this idea of making service as a part of my life is also certainly a part of, I would say, a calling. Mark and I are going, even if we don't make the funds to live in Ukraine, to keep doing work, or to, do these larger projects, Mission to Ukraine will continue. Like, it's not going to ever be shut down, because after the war, when Ukraine is won, there will need to be help in rebuilding Ukraine. And so, there will always be something there to help with, as well as other efforts that I'm sure we'll go into. And as to whether I can see myself going back to corporate life, for the short term, no. But I would never discount anything, I guess, from my future. I'm only 24. So I hopefully have a long life ahead of me in which there are a plethora of options out there. But at the moment, no, I don't see myself returning to the corporate life.
And another question Jen had asked, how long do you think it will take Ukraine to rebuild from the devastation?
That's a difficult question. If after Ukraine wins the war and all fighting is stopped and it stays that way, maybe 10 to 20 years. Yeah. I mean, it's not a quick fix. It's not duct tape or Band-Aid. It's I think the current estimates are in the trillions of dollars of damage. There's just so many different parts of Ukraine that need to be rebuilt. But I think too that there's a lot of luckily talk in international organizations and the European Union that once this war is over and Ukraine has won, that there are aid packages and there are things that are going to help and come, catalyze and encourage development and partners from all over the world to come to Ukraine. But that only starts when the fighting stops, and the fighting will only stop if support continues. Not only military support, which of course is the thing directly fighting the battles, but humanitarian support, what we do, which is enabling the people to continue enduring and being resilient on our behalf, to this terrible aggressor.
Right. I love that when you said when Ukraine wins the war.
Yeah, I
love that.
You have to speak in affirmatives.
Yeah.
You have to speak in the future that you want, especially about a war as terrible as this.
Right.
So never do I think that Ukraine won't win. The only discussions and thoughts we ever have, me and Mark or anyone we ever speak with, is about how long it will take, and what that end will look like is up for debate.
Right. Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? I think like this skill that you and Mark both share in putting this together is remarkable. But like, I think your main superpowers for both of you is your humanity and your humility, and just like your belief in the goodness of humankind. Like that's remarkable, and I think that's what's going to enable you to continue to be such a success, and just bring such joy and practical assistance to everybody that you meet, and giving them a platform to tell their stories. So amazing first couple of years out of college, Dillon. Wow.
Thank you.
But we'll just be following, and I'll send everybody the links again in a follow-up email tomorrow. And I will encourage people to follow you on Instagram, and just continue to success and safe travels back in mid-January. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining this evening.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.